Stephen A., I'll start with you. Will the Cowboys receivers actually be better this year?
I believe they will. But before I go into that, I will say this. I'm very, very disappointed in hearing what Tavon Austin had to say. Those words, somebody needs to tell him, that's inexcusable. You're a professional football player. What do you mean you didn't take it seriously? What do you mean you took it for granted? You understand? This is the National Football League. Lifespan of a National Football League player, you've alluded to this.
3.5 years.
Many kids, 3.5 years, Max Kellerman. What the hell you think this is? You've been in the league since 2013. You telling me you underachieved and you're blaming yourself and your lack of focus and effort and commitment? That is a damn shame. I hope you get it together and I hope you mean what you said. But damn, that's a bad quote. It's very indictable. Now, having said all of that, let me say this. Dez Bryant lost the step. That's why you don't have people knocking down his door for a job. Now, do I think he could resurrect himself? Yes, I do. But he lost a step. I'm not talking about me. If you speak to NFL aficionados, they will tell you once upon a time he was open even when he wasn't open. That was no longer the case. The level of separation he could gain is no longer there. You know, you look at his numbers from the last 3 years, 53% or less of the passes that were thrown in his direction ended up completed. You got to pay attention to that. Jason Witten, a future Hall of Famer, our colleague here, bottom line is, at the end of his career, got a bit slower, even though still effective, wasn't there. So when you're talking about the Dallas Cowboys, you're talking about an inability to throw outside the numbers and to have a legitimate deep threat. Anybody that's youthful, that has speed, that can give you something outside the numbers is a plus, particularly when you have Ezekiel Elliott and Dak Prescott. I would say I expect the Dallas Cowboys offense, particularly their passing game, to be better this year than they were last year.
Well, no, I don't. I think it'll be comparable. Let me just say that I don't have a problem with Tavon Austin's quote because it explains some things. He was a very high draft pick who has, as a number one receiver...
Well, not the quote, but do you have a problem with him feeling that way?
But hold on. You made your point, I'm making mine. As a number one receiver, Tavon Austin there's a term for it, JAG, just a guy. You know, he's talented, but if he's your number one, you just got a guy. You don't have an elite receiver. So what his quote
then why do you have a problem with my point?
What his quote tells me is there may be a reason for that. Maybe he didn't have the proper motivation because he was coasting on talent and his draft position, and now he's like, oh, wow, I've already switched teams, and I'm just considered just a guy now. Maybe I got to really learn what it is to be successful at this level. So it's not that his behavior in the past is okay if he was slacking off, but time will tell if he's either changed or if that's really the reason he wasn't better than he is.
I'm saying he basically said he was.
No, well, what he thinks and what is may be two different things. What? That's number one. Number two, look at the receiving core. It's just okay. I mean, yeah, they're all good receivers. It's the NFL. But compared to other receiving cores, it's all right. If the Dallas Cowboys receiving core is better, it will be because Ezekiel Elliott doesn't have to serve a 6-game suspension. If you have Ezekiel Elliott for all 16 games, your receiving core will be a little better. But adding Tavon Austin, you think, oh, my God, things are so much different? Per his quote, so far, if he's your number one, you just got a guy.
I'm not talking about Tavon Austin. I'm talking about a collection of young, athletic guys who can run.
All right, let me do this.
Cowboys receivers, Tavon Austin. First of all, on Tavon Austin, you're being too hard. And let me tell you why. I happen to be a little bit plugged in, be reading, be talking to people. Here's the thing about Tavon Austin. He's putting in extraordinary work this year, Stephen A. He's not just starting to meet the minimum bar of what work ethic is in the NFL. They're talking about staying before and after, catching passes from the third-string quarterback who might not make the team. His quote specifically was, when I read Steph Curry takes 2,000 J's a day, I said to myself, why can't we catch 2,000 balls a day? In other words, he wasn't just talking about his own individual work ethic in the past, which he was indicting that as well. He was talking about everybody in the NFL and the kind of work they put in compared to a guy like Steph Curry. Tavon Austin is getting rave reviews for specifically his work ethic coming out of Dallas. I don't find that something that you indict. I find that something that you celebrate. Now for the receivers, this is where I think you're right. I think the passing game, and this is the key, the passing game for the Dallas Cowboys will be better, but the receivers aren't. You can't take away Dez Bryant and take away Jason Witten and say your receiving core is better. That led the team in targets, that led the team in catches. Both of those top two guys.
Yeah, but they led because they didn't have, like, that says something. That's an indictment of the receiving
core. But look,
core.
man, I'm an optimist, and I love to think Michael Gallup, the third-round pick, is going to be a stud number one, and Allen Hurns is going to have a resurgence to 2015, and Cole Beasley's going to have a resurgence to 2016. I love to believe all that's true. But the truth of the matter is it's not Zeke the key to that passing game that I agree with Stephen A. about. It's about coaching. And that gives me worry. It's about Sanjay Lal plus open routes plus Dak Prescott. Does that equal the New England way? I hope it does in Dallas.
You don't believe in the sophistication of the coaching staff?
I'm not
I'd like to
convinced
respond
on the creativity.
I'd like to respond. You both need to be careful
What?
about what y'all are saying. Because remember that you're up here 5 days a week talking about players and talking about their performances. And when you take into consideration that he says the quote that he said, I understand. I'm not sitting there saying that, you know what, I'm indicting him. I'm saying he's indicted himself with his quote. Why do I say that? Because guess what? You got to be a self-starter to be elite. Every great player that we talk about, regardless of the sport, we never limit our conversation to their abilities and their exploits. We always take into account their work ethic. We always take into account their commitment. And if you are exposing that there was a lack of commitment on your part at some time, and we have the level of production or absence thereof to validate what effort you may not have given. Of course I'm saying he can change. I'm saying, simply put, when I'm looking at you, I was thinking injuries. I'm thinking you're not good enough.
Now you're finding out it's something that you don't like.
And now I'm finding out it's
but you know
something
what?
that you said you deprived yourself of.
This is something I wanted to talk about yesterday with Cam's talk about the wall, which we all criticized.
Right.
I understand what he means about consistency.
I didn't have a problem with that.
I understand what he means about consistency, but I don't like it when people hold someone, in this case, Tavon Austin, whoever it is, to a position where they don't allow room for growth. In other words, ideally, he'd have been like Tom Brady or Derek Jeter or Kobe Bryant, a guy who was completely internally motivated, never needed external motivation to look to anyone else, could do it himself. That's ideal. But life's not ideal. Not every player is like that and going to the Hall of Fame. Some people have to learn that. And if you're going to take that as a damnable offense that he once upon a time he didn't fully understand what it took to get the most out of his ability, and you're going to hold him to that rather than to allow for growth,